there are those people who are very aware that they are having a human experience and they really make the most of their time here on Earth. And then there are other people who don't. And I want to get into how to make sure that you're not one of these people who doesn't, and how to honor your own human experience, especially when it comes to pursuing your calling and your vocation. And my name is Joe Yulee. I'm a philosopher. I am absolutely obsessed with vocations and paths and callings. And that's why I'm here on places like Substack and YouTube. I host a podcast called the Career Archetypes Podcast and Instagram. I also have a community where I show people how to choose the right career path with conviction by unearthing their very own career archetype, because it's my belief that to not know what your calling is in this life and to pursue it is this real tragedy. And it's so important to our soul's development that we have to figure this out and then go ahead and walk this path. And one thing that I've noticed a lot of in my time of over half a decade of working with people on pursuing their vocation is that a lot of people don't really take into consideration that they're having a human experience here in this world. They have these other things around them that are sort of pulling their attention away from them. And they're getting fixated on these other areas of life, these sort of smaller areas of life. And because of that, they're missing the big event. They're missing the show. They're missing their own life. And many people don't honor their own human experience. And one of the things that I've seen when people typically hit around the age of 25, it can happen a little bit earlier, but typically around the age of 25, people start to turn on. They start to become awake. They start to reflect in ways that they haven't reflected on before. And they start to think about things such as, is this really what I want to be doing with the rest of my life? Should I actually be walking this type of path? They start to question these very fundamental things that appear as typically problems, but underneath they're asking these deeper questions such as, what is my calling? What is my purpose? What is the meaning of my life and my existence? Now, many people try to ignore this stuff, right? Because it sort of interrupts their lives. And so as it interrupts, they're like, I don't really want to think about it that hard. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and pick this path because my mom said it, or my dad said it, or some of my friends are pursuing the same degree and I kind of want to be around them. And they go ahead and start pursuing something that isn't truly connected to what it is that they're meant to be doing in this life. And because they go ahead and pursue this type of a path, they ending up in some other place that they realize wasn't quite for them, and they have a really hard time of getting out of that path and transitioning. And many people don't actually get out of it. And so when the brain starts to turn on, you can sort of line this up with the prefrontal cortex, but as the brain starts to turn on, you start to come awake around this age and you start to reflect on these things. You start to look at the world differently, and you have some choices that are presented to you as to how you want to go about living. Now, many people, because they're young and they haven't really gone through anything yet, end up choosing things that aren't quite it. And so there's this clunkiness to it where they're not quite in the right zone. They're trying to figure themselves out. They're trying to figure out who they are, where their place is. And it's quite bumpy. It can be quite chaotic at the time. And what I've noticed is that the people that continue to reflect on this stuff and go deeper on it and really continue to ask these questions to confront who it is that they are and what it is that they deeply want to be doing in this life, end up getting to the other side where they do come to some form of conclusion and conviction in what it is that they're meant to be pursuing in this life. And what ends up going on here is that the people that didn't figure it out, they end up in jobs where they're sort of at the computer screen, they're kind of having to wiggle their mouse and show that they're online to their manager or their boss, and they're kind of just dragging themselves out of bed all the time, constantly feeling as though they are losing energy. They're sort of decaying in this role because their sense of self isn't being nurtured or fed. Instead, what's being fed is their ability to continue on surviving. Now, there is some nuance here that I do want to sort of bring forward, which is that these roles where we have to survive, they're often important. They can be used as stepping stones. So I don't want to come out and make it seem as though anybody that is not in their calling right now at this point in time is doing all the wrong things. but simply to bring your attention to, hey, there's a possibility of being able to transition out of this. And that possibility is there for me if I want it and I haven't yet done it. Now, as people that are having a human experience, and like I said, many people don't even realize that they're having a human experience, but if you are waking up to the fact that, hey, I am immortal, at some point in my life, I am going to pass away, I am going to have a funeral, we can get a little bit dark or a little bit morbid here. But if you are awoken to that fact, that, hey, at some point, this is all going to end, the big show is going to end, I am going to be on my way to whatever your take of what you think happens in the afterlife. Personally, I think that the show goes on in some form. I don't know exactly what that form is, but it opens up a really interesting conversation around reincarnation. What type of form does that reincarnation take place through? But even if through the lens of reincarnation, this life is going to end at some point. So there needs to be some sort of, okay, what is happening here and how do I want to fulfill this lifetime? Like, how do I live it at its capacity, at its maximum? What does that look like for me? And by asking these questions, you start to tap into what it is that you're actually meant to be doing. Now, these questions can often be painful because what they do is they present something that you don't have yet. And by presenting that thing that you don't have yet, and contrasting it with where you actually are, it's like, ugh, that hurts, that sucks, I'm not there yet. But what it does do is it shows you that there is a clear thing that you can pursue, that you can begin to move towards. That's one of the reasons, and I brought this up on my Instagram a couple of days ago, and that people will often get envious of other people and they sort of don't know why. And let me tell you why that is. One of the most common reasons people get envious of other people, these could be celebrities, influencers, peers that you have that seem to be like moving up the ladder or moving up in the world, is because there's some facet within their path. It might not be the exact same path that you're meant to be pursuing, but there's some facet that they are pursuing, that they have or they have attained, that you yourself want. So there's something within them that you yourself would like to take on. And in the beginning, prior to this sort of envy really, really building, what often this will look like is this pleasurable pull in different directions. And yet, if this pleasurable pull isn't doing justice in the sense of you are aware that this is actually what you want to be doing and you deny this part of yourself, it can then come out as things like jealousy and things like envy, because this other person has something that you yourself have, but it's dormant within you. It hasn't been activated. And so therefore, a piece of you is missing. And there's a part of you that's annoyed with that. And so you haven't yet brought it into yourself. And so it's one sign that, hey, what this person has, in some way you want it. In some way you have to bring it back. In some way you lost it, right? Because if you take this more of a Jungian approach whereby we are almost like scattered fractures of ourself, and the journey of life and the journey of coming to ourselves, which Jung called individuation, is this period of bringing things back into wholeness. And if you do notice yourself being envious or jealous about somebody's success and what it is that they're doing, then I would ask you to reflect on not simply the surface level of what that person's path looks like, but the deeper layers as to, hey, is that person up? Do they potentially have some sort of work ethic that you don't have? Are they in a particular field? Maybe it's not the exact thing that you do, but they're in a particular field that you resonate with. So they give off a kind of a feeling that you yourself would like to express in the public domain or in the work world that you haven't yet been able to do. And maybe you're not even that aware of it, and all that comes up is emotions, but this is stuff to work through in order to get more in tune with yourself. And this all has to do with honoring your human experience, because what you're doing here is you're saying that through this experience, I'm going to get more into myself. I'm going to grow into myself. I'm going to fully become myself over time. And this is one of the most potent, important things that one can do in their lifetime, is to fully become themselves. Now, a lot of people think that they are themselves, and even the most people that aren't themselves will, stand there with 2 feet solidly in the ground and say, like, I am definitely myself. And yet there are so many different pieces that we are yet to find that only comes through these reflective moments, these dissecting of why we're being drawn into certain interests, and also these occurrences whereby suddenly life takes a turn and we end up finding some more information about ourselves that we didn't yet know. And as McKenna might say, the boundaries dissolve and suddenly we are more aware of things outside of the walls. And by doing this, once again, we honor our human experience by growing. Now, I want to bring up something because I had this conversation in the comment section on my Instagram, and one person mentioned that when you're pursuing your vocation and you're pursuing your calling, the type of work doesn't matter. And I disagree with this. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because oftentimes when we honor our human experience, it can mean pursuing our calling, because the majority of our adult life is spent doing work. So the type of work that we spend our time doing is really, really important because it's going to take up a big chunk of your life. So if you get that piece wrong, it's going to be a rough ride. I typically will say there are 2 things that you want to get right in life. The first one is your partner, and the second one, like husband, wife, whatever it is. And the second one is your work. If you get those 2 things right, it's going to be okay. But this person in the comment section, they said that the type of work doesn't matter. And he also said that it was egotistical to sort of say or pursue a form of work, and that we should look for spiritual liberation and enlightenment simply through the act of doing it. Now, this was kind of, I've heard this sort of approach in some Taoist circles and some of the sort of like Zen Buddhism spaces. And I get sort of where this is coming from, so I don't want to, miss the detail or the gray zone of this entire space, that you can, go through life and find a sense of being at one with the world. But at the same time, so many people often have very earthly, worldly work to do that they will be avoiding, or they're not taking it to that next height that they know deep down, hey, it's time for that next level. Let's go to that next level. And they're like, yeah, but it's kind of comfortable here. I'm kind of used to this thing. Instead, I'm going to just go and say I'm working on my spirituality, when really the growth of their soul is in the actual creating of the work that they're meant to do next. And so do I think that you can go and do dishes and just be a cleaner and find some sort of spiritual enlightenment? So my answer is yes, but what I would say is that for the majority of people, that's not the whole picture. That might be for a very, very small select group. And even with that small select group, there are certain pathways that do approach enlightenment from a sense of going into solitude, going into certain levels of confinement, whereby they're approaching their path through this, hey, I'm only seeking this sense of enlightenment, this sense of spiritual liberation. And so you really want to define whether you're in that camp or not. Some career archetypes that sort of fit that mold, the pursuit of a nun or the pursuit of a monk. We have certain paths, and they are available to us even in their traditional form, right? Because there are paths out there in the world that haven't yet been created, that they need to be forged out in the world, that they're coming. And then we also have very, very traditional paths that are still relevant in the modern era. And some of them might be pursuing, for people that are interested in the religious life, might fit them perfectly. And it's all about this dissection of who it is that you are, what it is that you really want to pursue in this life, and making sure that you're attuned to that, and attuned to that in such a way where you're able to know and differentiate between, hey, that path isn't mine, this path definitely is. I call this path that you don't know about, or that you know isn't your own, typically is a temptation path, and the path that you know to be yours is the actual path itself. Now, obviously, if you don't know what your path is, you won't know whether it's a temptation path or not, and you'll have to end up discerning between the two. And if you're interested, I have other videos on temptation paths and understanding what those are, so you can go ahead and look into that. But you do have to be able to discern between the path and the non-paths, the paths that might look shiny, or the paths that might help you to survive and to carry on physically breathing, but they don't nurture anything deeper within you. They don't develop your soul. And this is this level of repression that many people end up having, which is they deny the calling, they don't want to listen to it, they instead will just continue on going to a job that they partially like. And this is what I see as dishonoring your human experience, to be doing something that you don't really like and just keep going to it and slowly just feeling yourself drain. Now, there is another nuance here, which I do want to bring up, which is that there are some people that have a purpose in life where it is to, say, for example, a mother or a father, where their total aim in life or their deepest desire is to make sure that they support their family. And maybe the best way that they can support their family is through some sort of financial means or financial endeavor. And so therefore they go and get a job or a career path they don't really, really like. And they do it because it makes them so happy to be able to provide for their family. I have seen that happen. Now, I would probably contend that, hey, there's probably a way where you don't have to go to a job that's absolutely horrible, and you can find still your vocation within that and be able to support your family. But that's something that you do have to, that I do want people to consider. And this is this thing where it's not black and white. We always have to consider all the nuances, all the gray areas when it comes to the uniqueness of a human experience. But if you know that, hey, my total life's aim isn't to simply provide for my family, and I'm still doing a job that sucks just to keep the lights on, just to make sure that I can feed myself at night, then you'll want to start to question and reflect on this. And like I said, this typically turns on in the brain around the age of 25. Most people will start to deny it. They'll go through a lot of pain, and even that pain will typically not get them to go ahead and search deeper for their calling, but instead they'll just start to try to numb it. And this is where you get things like midlife crises, or later on they're on their deathbed and just regretting what they ended up pursuing because it wasn't what they wanted to pursue, and now it's too late. I never want that to happen to people. There's no reason why that should happen to people, and yet it happens all the time. So this actually gets at a much deeper idea, which is you have to go deeply into yourself in this deep introspection where you're fully receptive and taking in and also questioning all your base level assumptions of who you are and what it is that you're about. And I call that process an unearthing process, whereby people will unearth this material that is within them that potentially they sort of know is there, they don't want to look at, or alternatively, they didn't know was there and now they've brought it to their attention, and then they get these paradigm shifts where they start to look at the world completely differently. And by doing this unearthing process, I call it unearthing your queer archetype. The archetype is about finding out this base level pattern that resides within your soul. And by connecting into that, you figure out what your vocation is. And by tapping into that, you get the initial seed of how to go about honoring your human experience when it comes to your work and your vocation in the world. So rather than pursuing a path that a friend has or a friend suggested or your parents will applaud you for, or a path that looks really cool on social media, or a path that looks like it's going to make you a lot of money, really digging deep into what your interests are, what your passions are, who you are as a person, what your life story has been so far, what your different blockages are, and at the same time you might have desires around your blockages. That can often be a telling sign as to, hey, there's probably something here that reflects your vocation. And by tapping into that, you once again get at the seeds of how to go ahead and honor your own personal human experience. Which leads me to this idea of, I brought up before that you are mortal, right? Your life is going to end at some point, and you want to live it as fully as possible in this lifetime. When you have an opportunity to fully find out who you are, to fully experience not only yourself, but other people and the world. And by going and doing work that takes up Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, where it's just numbing, it's mundane, it's monotonous, dishonors this. And this might be painful for you to hear, but know that the change doesn't have to happen overnight. It can be a slow transition. It can be a period of, hey, I need to start to reflect on this stuff so that I can eventually change. But it does have to change eventually if you are feeling that kind of pain in this experience. And work needs to be interwoven with our own lives. It's not this separate thing where we sort of cut ourselves in half and sort of throw this numb side to the 9 to 5 job, and you're like, I'm just going to pretend like that doesn't exist and that didn't happen. I'm not going to even identify with that side of myself. A lot of people don't want to even identify with that version of who they're like. That's not me. And yet there they are walking that way and in those jobs. And so you don't want to live that kind of life and only sort of identify with the person that you are after work or on the weekends. You want to go and grab that side of yourself and say like, hey, I want me to be more full, more total in the world, in my vocation, in my work. And it really starts here and now, where you can start to bring the side of yourself back into it. And like I said at the beginning, it might be painful. But by doing that, you ask the right questions and you start to bring yourself into congruence. And that allows you to move forward in alignment in your path. And so if you are interested in learning more about how to honor your very own human experience, then I would encourage you and invite you to check out our online Unearth community, where I help people to choose the right career path with this deep sense of conviction and inner knowing that this is the path for me. At the moment, we're actually having a holiday program whereby members within the space are going to be studying alongside each other during this period of December. It kicks off on December the 14th all the way to the first week of February. We're going to be having live study sessions where people are going to be jumping on live on Zoom with me. We're going to be studying. Many people in that space are trying to figure out their vocation. I have a guided process that shows people how to do that. And others are refining and figuring out how they're going to start to walk and live their very own career archetype. All members get access to over 450 plus career archetype names. And there are so many different career archetypes, and there's definitely an individual and personal one for you. So if you're interested in checking that out, especially during this holiday period, then I'll leave a link below.